and I'm quite sure.
Okay. By the way, what happened to George Crook?
He might
Yeah,
be.
good question.
And
So while we wait for George to come back, what's an example of your continuing work on liturgy?
me? Well, I need to,
There's George. You were off for a minute, George.
yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just so preoccupied with this camera not doing anything.
Okay, well, if you want to stay on that project, I'll put something else on the table.
Why don't you
I
put
think
something
I-
else on the table? Because
Yeah.
I'm gonna see this through until I achieve victory or death.
Good. I think I told you last week that a member of our parish is really in serious mental
Stress.
condition and about to be homeless. And I tried to introduce her to the mental health department of the diocese. And the minute she heard mental health, she shut it down. And I'm just wondering if maybe some of you have experienced that and that we have to be a little more diplomatic when we're referring somebody for help because they're in such denial.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. Johnny, maybe she was reacting to mental health of the diocese. Word diocese. She didn't want to go there for mental health. That's one thought. And my stepson.
Very good, George.
Yeah, that could be. It could be. So the other thing is, my stepson is the president and executive director of Mental Health Colorado, which is a national organization that has chapters in different states. And I've listened to him quite a bit. And there is this reluctance to people going to therapy or mental health. I don't know how old she is. Is she middle-aged, John, or
50,
older?
50, like 57, 58.
Yeah. Maybe something like counseling or talk to somebody who can listen to your questions and feelings and help you sort them out. That kind of leaves things in her hands, but
Yeah.
kind of an assistant, or a helper type thing. And also,
But
yeah.
I've been cautioned not to get sucked in to this. I can only go so far, and I want to be a facilitator, but not get too sucked into it. I'm not a rescuer.
Right. Yeah. So you can only do so much. You can, and what might be good is to actually give her a phone number. Sometimes people actually, if she has a phone number in hand, that means she doesn't have to go looking anything up. And sometimes that's helpful.
Uh-huh.
Here comes Ned.
Hi, Ned.
Ned,
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Ned.
Sorry to be late. Hi, Fred.
I'm having some difficulties with my camera.
Yeah, you're frozen.
Yeah.
Hi, George. You're frozen. Oh, you're not.
George
Yeah,
is
yeah,
off,
Let me,
off in his car for coffee.
Tom, don't you have to go to your treatment?
I'm sorry?
Tom, don't you have to go to your treatment now?
no, that's at
Oh, you don't.
10:30 this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
But the security and privacy menu on here says that I will not have access to, or Zoom will not have access to the camera until it is quit. So do you mind if I quit you? And then could you all log on again?
Sure.
Sure.
I would appreciate
sure.
that. Then-
Anything,
then you'll be able
anything
to
for
come
Tom
here.
Welbers, I promise.
Okay.
After all, you're the Hefe.
Hi, John. Hi, George.
Hello.
Hi,
Greetings.
Fred. Well, it didn't work, obviously.
Well,
So you're just going to have to look at my picture that was actually taken at St. Peter's Square in Rome
Oh,
4 years ago at the Deacons Jubilee. Permanent deacons.
well, it's a
okay.
good picture. So,
Okay, here comes Ned.
hi, Ned.
Tom, you're still smiling there.
Yeah, it,
Aren't you
I'm not
glad it's
smiling
not a
that much
frown?
right now, actually, because the camera just, I don't know. We'll have to go with it.
Okay.
Yeah, my camera's never worked on it's a Lenovo computer late model, which is why I'm using my iPad for all these meetings.
Mhm.
What, George Ferrick's not in yet?
Yeah, he was with us.
Oh,
He's
Okay.
still hanging upside down from the ceiling of his car,
like
sort of
that. Huh.
sort of bat-like.
Yeah.
Where's the
Well, the
bar?
thought struck me while we were in pause there, that at 78, 79, 80, and 81, we're still damn flexible, aren't we?
Yes.
We are. We are.
Mm,
I was with a
Uh,
chiropractor yesterday who would maybe.
Yeah, John wasn't speaking physically flexible.
Oh. Well, I was, I guess.
Yeah, that not so
I'll
much.
trouble the other way too, so.
Mhm.
Well, Tom,
Good.
what about this Monsignor that used to work for the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, that was the subject of this outing by surveillance, I guess,
Mhm.
that you were quite concerned about. What are your thoughts? I mean, how should we view that?
I don't know. I'm of mixed mind because, quite frankly, it looks like the guy was a, what would you say, very, very active on that dating site
Yeah, and compulsive.
and kind of compulsive. And there should have been, I mean, I just think, for one thing, it's almost inconceivable to me that somebody didn't know about that, who was in a position to intervene before he got to that kind of a level of public responsibility, shall we say.
Well,
I don't know. See, the other side of it is, which that I think the NCR article, which I didn't totally agree with, but the was it Washington Post or New York Times article basically said, that this whole question of data tracking being so widely available is obviously, this is another example of it. And what are the ethics really of using that kind of tracking in order to out somebody's misbehavior? I don't, I got more questions than answers.
Maybe
Well,
two-
How about the legal minds here?
Well, I don't know about legal, but I don't know, I know I'm a lawyer, but
And I
uh,
don't know about mines, so
yeah, my son was a director at Google and he worked there for, I don't know, 10 years or so. And he,
There's George.
pardon me?
There's
George
That's
Farrell
George.
is showing up.
Yeah. Wait a minute, is that George? Yeah, it is. Looks different. Anyway,
Oh,
and
glass.
he tells me we have to be very, very careful. He left Google believing that Google was going in ways unconventional and immoral with respect to its very intentional moving of its users' minds and feelings.
Mhm.
And that was confirmed in I think it was a pretty good confirmation in a video, an hour and a half video that was put together by a whole bunch of formerly highly placed executives and um, IA people from Google and Facebook and Twitter and all those places. If you have, I think I've mentioned this before, if you have Netflix and go into Social Dilemma, you'll see a docudrama
Right.
that will, I think, concern you a lot. And you know, I'm not surprised that they were able to track this guy. I don't know what they're doing with other folks. Mark is telling me, don't use Google, you know, for financial stuff and even some religious stuff. As I mentioned to you before, I think several times as Mark was making his way through merit, not you know any other way, um, uh, in the echelons of Google. How can you be a God believer? How can you do that? You're so smart. I mean, look what you've done. How can you? How can that mind accept a deity? Um, and that was the general feeling, not that everybody talked with him about it, but the general feeling of the scientists who were there. He's got a PhD in artificial intelligence, computer science from pretty good places. Wow. And Stanford and UCLA, and he left. And lots of other guys have left, not only Google, but this other place. So I would recommend Social Dilemma in Netflix, hour and a half. It's quite a mind opener and might help, you know, give a little more substance or sense of what's going on and how
Mhm.
this priest got tracked and followed and
Mhm.
et cetera.
but now back to Google just for a minute. How does the religious, call it skepticism or mockery or whatever it was, of various of his peers, Marcos's peers,
Mhm.
relate to the surveillance issue at Google?
Well,
I mean, they could be devout theists and think it's perfectly great to
they could,
go.
they could, but they're not, number one. Number two, they are engaging in subtle but very clear use of their technologies to move people's feelings and minds into a very, very secular, I don't know how else to use a secular way of thinking. There is no God. Our feelings are, are our ultimate truth. You know, as long as you respect my feelings, I will respect your feelings, whatever they may be. And given the disputes, the chasms that are opening, um, I'm not surprised that IA stuff was used to track a priest.
Well, but the users are apparently devout Roman Catholics of a conservative stripe.
Okay. So it's being misused by the right now instead of the left. Who, I don't know.
Well, okay, now how would we feel if, let's say, the NCR were able to gain access to Archbishop Vigano's phone conversations,
Wow.
and that were to reveal that Vigano was being supported and bankrolled by Trump and Associates,
Wow.
which I personally think, you know,
Is
a
that
hidden subtext here, and this is my opinion, is that Vigano is Bannon, Steve Bannon, is
right?
in cahoots with a number of very, very radical right-wing groups in the Catholic Church, and wouldn't be surprised if Vigano were enmeshed in all of that too.
Well, there certainly is a lot of money that people who are of the extreme right persuasion, and whether they're deists or committed Christians of whatever ilk, we're becoming, I think, people are accepting the use of artificial intelligence in whatever way it can be used to find out what the other guy is doing, and to push their own ideas.
Well, apparently here, first of all, I have a friend who's quite familiar with the nooks and crannies of the gay demi-monde, who tells me that to call Grindr a dating application is a pretty grand euphemism. I mean, it's something that exists to facilitate sexual encounters in the gay community, and the heterosexual equivalent is Snapchat, I'm told, and those who use these are looking for sexual partners. Period. The end.
Mhm.
Not a chance to meet somebody to date.
Just casual sex.
And perhaps better expressed as sexual hookups rather than even partners, which
Yeah. Yes. Not a sexual partner for anything ongoing, just
Right.
an event.
a moment, an event.
That's why your term hookup is right. Agreed.
Yeah. So this poor priest, I mean, he's really obviously living a double life, and he's out of control, one would infer, and now he's outed, and that can't be right to do that to somebody. But on the other hand, if one were his boss at the UCCB and that information came to you, I mean, you'd immediately fire him, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And then what? I guess you would be as pastoral as your nature would let you be with somebody in his situation. But I mean, wouldn't it have been great if somebody had run that kind of a scam on Theodore McCarrick and just strangled that monster in the cradle. And so it can't be right to do this. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, and Tom, you may have some insight into this as a quasi techie, or, but as I understand it, supposedly the Grindr app was bulletproof. You know, it's sold to people with the representation that, hey, you know, this is confidential. Nobody can get into this. And there was a hole, I guess, in the security programming of the thing that enabled these people to get individual data, which supposedly they can't. I mean, we're being monitored all the time by the government, and, you know, in theory, except we're not as individuals. You know, there's all, as I understand it, there's all kinds of scanning of everything. And if you fall into a profile, you know, you've been to Turkey and then flown from there to Tehran 3 times in the last 5 years. And now you're getting phone calls from, yeah, you know, I don't know, Yemen with some frequency. Then they get interested in you as an individual. But absent something like that, I don't think the government I'm talking about, by law, they're not allowed to hone in on you as an individual. I think, as I understand.
It seems to me, and knowing nothing about it, maybe I ought to not say a word, but seems to me that there's a chain. They are interested in our individual behaviors. That's why they have algorithms to track them. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've experienced increasingly websites saying, we're using cookies and we want you to accept our use of cookies. And then they give you this sort of disclaimer that's not, you know, if you read it carefully, it says, we're tracking you. We want to be more efficient in understanding you, and so that we can determine what to offer you or what to provide for you. So why don't you accept these cookies? I always try to avoid.
But I think that whether you're doing that to you or for you or whatever they would conceive it, you are still anonymous to them.
Well, you are anonymous until, as you say, you do something that piques their curiosity.
Yeah.
Something that could be either sensational or interest to the government or whatever. But they are tracking you, and they determine where your mind is, where your decision making.
Well, but wait, correct me if I'm wrong. The non-governmental
Yes.
entity
Yes.
can't
The Googles and the yeah.
the vendors they may sell this data to. So, as I understand it, they can't get at you as an individual. They're not allowed to do that. The government can in certain circumstances that we talked about.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
they can't get at you as an individual, but they can get at you as your web presence, because they track you enough to know what advertising you might jump to, you might click on.
Absolutely.
But I don't
They-
think they're allowed to conceive of you as you.
Well,
The
no,
being
but they
allowed.
are certainly allowed to conceive of you as consumer.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And the other thing that cookies do, which is immensely convenient, is cookies allow them to store needed information about, let's say, your your access to their site. You know, we've all gone on a lot of websites where the first time we go on, we have to put in a password.
Mhm.
And then after that, because of the cookies that they put on your machine, they recognize you and you don't have to put in the password again. Now, if you tell them no cookies, or if you delete your cookies, every time you go on, you have to put in the password, which for particularly some sites where you don't need a lot of security, where there's no sensitive data and whatnot, you just want to go on because they've got pretty pictures of flowers or something like that, and all very innocent stuff. It becomes a hassle if every time you want to go onto it, you've got to retype your password. You've got to remember what the damn password was to begin with,
Hey,
in the midst of
Yeah,
having
that's-
492 other passwords.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that cookies do. I've generally simply accepted them because I don't want to go through the hassle of deciding which cookies to get and which
Yeah.
cookies not. And I try to keep my nose clean.
But the thing is, if you watch this hour-and-a-half long docudrama, is that they begin to, as I think, George, you must have said that, or Tom, I don't know, a profile is developed of this category of people, which can be weaned and made smaller and smaller. And either the category of people or you in particular are sent stuff that they think you're going to buy, and they make it very enticing. Now I know that there's Amazon, and then there's something that Amazon owns that's called Woot. And now that there's some other sales agency that promises to beat Amazon's prices and has some of the stuff that I'm interested in. I mean, books, spiritual stuff, martini. They're offering you stuff, and where do you get that information?
Yes, I bought a couple books by Cardinal Martini, and bang, on the Apple News summary, here's an article about Cardinal Martini. Gee, maybe there's some sort of connection, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that these guys are really upset about, that left these huge monoliths making billions of dollars, run by some very ruthless people, I think. What they're saying is that they are, through the use of these cookies and other IA technologies, learning how you make decisions, in what directions you're going. And if they don't like the directions, if they don't like the directions that you're going in, they begin to very slowly, like the frog in the pot is getting a little hotter and hotter, and imperceptibly finally gets cooked, nudge you in a direction that they want you to go. And if it's subtle enough, you begin to at least say, well, maybe that's not such a big deal or such a bad thing. And I don't know. I think the implications are enormous. I really do. What do you
What's the name of that, Ned? I have so resisted watching it, but what's the name of it? The documentary?
It's called The Social Dilemma. Why are you? Why do you drag your feet to see it?
I'm very suspicious of what sound like right-wing conspiracy theories.
Oh, but
for one thing, and two, I've kind of, and probably more operatively, I've kind of given up In other words, I've mildly investigated all this stuff and convinced myself that what do I care if somebody's sending me advertisements? You know, for so what?
I suppose that's true, but you think about the more the broader community. Hell is
Wait, social
Talking-
dilemma? Did you say?
social dilemma, yeah.
Dilemma. Okay.
Netflix. Anyway, I don't know. You know, I think that this is a very worthy topic of you know, some study and some conversation, and maybe it's a red herring, but I don't think so.
I don't either.
What do you think, Fred? Been having heard this a little bit.
I more or less agree with you. I saw the social dilemma.
Oh, did you?
I think it had anything to do with right-wing conspiracies.
I don't either.
And anything that's manipulative, I don't go for.
Exactly. Yeah, me too.
Of course, I'm manipulable.
We all hit the right buttons. You know,
Well, that's part of it too, because most of us labor under the illusion that we are invincible or
Yeah.
at least resistant to manipulation. And
Right.
that attitude in itself blinds us to all kinds of manipulation.
Exactly. You know,
And that
Including-
sounds like, Ned, that's why Social Dilemma on Netflix rang so true with you, isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And well, enough said for me.
But it's really helpful for me to hear about Mark's witness.
Yeah. No, Mark, I have two sons, Fred. One is a much more liberal thinking guy, very bright. Assures me he is as Catholic as the day is long. And he has very different interpretations of the world than our other son, our older son, who's Mark, the one that was at Google for those many years. They both are very, I think, committed Catholics, but they see things in different ways. Mark it tends to you know, roll around the lip of extreme conservatism. And Dan is quite the other way. But any kind of manipulation is, and they're both doing it, both sides, is wrong. But you know, you almost begin to feel that the means, I mean, that the end justifies the means when you find out, you know, some of these things that need to be known if you're to trust people who inform your mind and spirit and soul. So here we have this guy at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops who has such power, at least as I understand it, he did. And you know, he's engaging in this and who knows what else. And it's not so much, well, you know, so the guy's gay, but he's in the kind of category of pleasure seekers that a whole bunch of heterosexuals are. I mean, this is the hookup culture, et cetera, et cetera. And what does that say about permanence and outside values? I mean, you know, objective values and all that kind of stuff. So anyway.
Your sons, are they friends to each other?
Yes, they're friends, but it's hard. It's very difficult. They at present, they've gotten to a point where They want to talk to each other. They want to be together, bring their families together. But it's not an easy thing to do.
It's kind of like an armed truce, knowing them both.
George knows them both. Dan
And I
is a
admire them both. I esteem them both. They're both wonderful, wonderful guys. I mean, Ned and I happened to parachute into, and I call him Marcos just because I knew him when he was baptized, etc. At some point he became Mark, and I just didn't make the shift, you know. But he, we walked into his house, and he's got 6 kids, Ned.
yeah.
And he and his 6 kids and his spouse are sitting there saying the rosary in Latin. And, you know, I don't know when the last time I heard the rosary in Latin was, but, Marco said, George, would you like to join us? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, shall we switch to English? And I said, no, I can handle this.
They don't by any means demand, prefer, etc. Latin. They just switch. Sometimes Sammy will pray in English, and Joshua will pray in Latin, and they're just very bright kids. And
well, they also say, correct me if I'm wrong, they also say the rosary in Spanish, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's the most happy, joyful family I've had exposure to. Just, in that household, and I've only been there a couple of times in the last 5 years, but there's just such tranquility and peace. And yet, even today, now that I'm back to being a so-called Catholic, I could never organize a household that way, Marcos is the captain of the ship, right, Ned? Ephesians chapter 5. And, Daniel's house is very, very different.
But Kim, his wife, who is an amazing organizational and intellectual mind, I think, there's a lot to deal with there. Believes and is given by Mark the love that Christ has for his church. She feels that. And so when they make a decision, if there's a disparity or an inconsistency in their conclusions, then Kim will say, okay, we'll do what you want, what you think. I've told you why I disagree, and you still think that the other way, so let's do it. And there's a real acceptance there, and real harmony. But Kim knows that she's respected and loved and all that kind of stuff, and doesn't need to say, this time I rule, this time,
Well, but boy, it sure wouldn't work with my wife. I'm going to tell you. Yeah, but I'll bet Kim got to that point of call it docility with grave difficulty. I mean, when I first met her, they were dating. Remember, Naj?
Yeah.
And she was a bit headstrong and an American girl. So
she's very strong and she's very bright and she can hold her own. But they've decided this, and it works for them.
I know a fair amount of Protestants of the Calvinist, of the Reformed tradition, not Karl Barth, Fred, but maybe a few steps down theologically, but they who practice that. The man's the head of the household, he's Jesus. And spouse, obey him the way you would Jesus, and man, love that spouse the way Jesus loves the church. And the foremost exponent I know says, hey, what woman is going to object if her husband is truly Christ-like? How bad can it be? You know, truly, if he is truly so. Wouldn't work in my house.
Well, it would
How
seem
about
to me,
yours,
and
George?
obviously I'm speaking from a celibate perspective, but it would seem to me one of the key things of their own religious convicted relationship would be, you know, if he is truly Christ-like, in the flicker of an eye, he will give his life for her. And
He would.
That is absolutely true.
I have no doubt.
yeah, and you know, and once you're aware of that in a spouse, that the love is that unconditional and mutual, you can probably, I would think, come to some kind of an agreement on the other aspects of the relationship too.
You know,
Years.
Tom, this is something that happened with me in conversation with Mark and Kim. We were debating something about the church's doctrine. I didn't know how to articulate what I wanted to articulate, and I didn't want to because I thought that I might be in territory that I couldn't be heard. And Kim looked at me and she said, Ned, you know that you are unconditionally loved by us, don't you? And I said, well, who now? I said, Kim, what do you mean by that? And then she explained it in, words that were very clear. And that opened the door for me to become even more honest and disclosing. And we left the conversation, my leaving the house and coming home with Darla, after real heartfelt hugs and a lot of love. There's something there that's really wonderful. On the other hand, our other son.
But wait, let me make one observation. But with that, I'll call it fundamentalism. I don't know, if that's the right term. But with that literal application of the first part of Paul's marriage teaching, accompanying that is a disposition to right-wing approaches to organizing society as a whole. I mean, Trumpism and conspiracy theories.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, that walks with it, and
well, it walks with it with them. I'm seeing glimmers of light, that are beginning to separate them from, some kind of absolutism. But they are so, Mark. It took a lot for Mark to leave Google. He was very highly placed and very highly compensated, and he has 6 kids, and he wants to take care of his children and his family. And he is very good at what he does. And he had some few allies, that is, people who were Christians, neither of them Catholics, but who believed in most of the things that he does. And he had solace with them. But it came to a point where his estimation of the lives that could be told and the manipulation that goes on, which is, in my puny brain, in the category of lying, so much that he just had to leave. And when he left, I don't know, something like 16, 18 people left within the next 3 months. This, I think this stuff is going on in many of these giants, you know, Facebook and Twitter and all that, because there are people who want to hold on to their integrity and get to the point where they don't know how to do it in that environment. You know, I think a lot of these dystopian stories come to mind, and you know, and I've always thought, particularly after I talk with you, George, or during when we're talking, this can't happen. Oh, this is not part of our culture. But I've come now to believe that our culture is exactly what it was in the Roman times, when the church was small and beginning. You know, there was this heel of the Romans on your neck, and you had to do some things or else. And we had to grow and flourish, and we did through the Holy Spirit. And we can do that again. But our church is so divided, you know, with the Vivanos on the one side, and I don't know who's on the other side that's so malicious.
I think we'd be hard pressed to find somebody as malicious as Vigano,
I agree.
personally.
Except that the Vigano side sees everybody else as malicious.
Yeah.
You know, they should look at the beam in their own eye.
And so say, and talk to people like my son, and because my son is looking for somebody to trust, he's set on people like him.
Yeah, but well, you know, I mean, what's wrong with the magisterium of the Catholic Church, the scriptures, and our liturgy?
Well, he very much follows that. And
Well, hopefully it'll be in Latin, though.
And then, no, it doesn't have to be in Latin. They're not, you know, Tridentine Rite Catholics, but they, for instance, Pope Francis has done and said some things that, you know, to the relatively conservative mind of Catholics would raise big red flags. Here they've been all their lives believing and practicing not going to communion because, I mean, we've talked about this before, because they're divorced. And here Francis is saying what to enlightened minds, and I don't mean that in any kind of pejorative way. I mean minds who think and know scripture and the history of the church, and doesn't seem so completely off. There are lots of people out there in horrible marriages, in living painful lives. And my take on it is Francis is saying, I acknowledge that. And those aren't marriages. Those ought to be seen through the eyes of God's mercy. And that just gets twisted by the Viganos of the world and Mark's computer-like mind. You know, what you do affects all of you. And, you know, he's at the highest level of that stuff. So it's not logical. It's not right. This is the way it's been. This is the way it's been interpreted. and if we have to suffer, we have to suffer. Look at Jesus on the cross. You know, if it's a difference between sin and suffering, you suffer. And our society is telling us you don't have to suffer. No, 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 no. If you're suffering, that's wrong, and you should get to a place where you are no longer suffering, and because that's good, and suffering is not something you should tolerate. I really do believe that's our culture, and it can be twisted into I think excess. I don't want to suffer. I'm happy.
Now,
I
to a
get
certain
it.
extent, what we have here is an internal clash among all of us
Yes.
between extremes. Elements of both extremes we tend to be drawn to.
Mhm.
Uh,
I agree.
and yet elements of both extremes we tend to say, hey, wait a minute, but that clash is, you know, is going on. And some people say, and I think rightly, you know, there's a lot that I don't go for in this extreme, but what I do go for kind of is something I can hang on to. And I think we see that on both the so-called right and so-called left.
Yeah.
What strong adherents of one side or the other are kind of willing to, if not turn a blind eye to, at least relegate to subordinate status for what they actually want to really uphold. That, you know, the rabid anti-abortion people are being guided by a very right, correct, virtuous, moral ideal. And many of us would see a problem with what they are willing to sort of shove aside in order to uphold the absoluteness of that ideal. And on the other hand, you've got people who are saying this particular sort of freedom and good and value in our society is such that, let's say, social justice is so important that I am willing to subordinate one aspect or several aspects of of the morality that I strongly agree with, but I'm willing to subordinate that to what I see as a higher good.
I think it's just so right.
Yeah, so I don't know, that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it right now.
George Farrig has now unmuted himself.
Yes,
Hey,
Back.
yes.
George.
I think
There.
George Farrig has something to say.
So
I'd like,
he's
Oh,
got-
I'd like Fred Lawrence
one-
to take on this too. Or Leonard.
one bonus of this morning's conversation is that I've discovered the cause of my mysterious weight gain. I've been accepting too many cookies without realizing what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that solved one problem. Yeah, I just, Fred will probably have something to say about it too, but I think the way you describe things, George and Ned, about Mark and so forth, is there's a classical culture. You know, this is the way it has always been. The essences of things have been all figured out, and it doesn't fit in with the kind of quantum physics type of culture that many people live in, you know, where things are moving around or we have an idea that we don't know. You know, somebody told me that a doctor from Harvard after 5 years said, you know, 50% of what I learned is out the window now, you know, and, you know, and there's different, look at the different ways the attorneys of interpreting the Constitution,
Mhm.
and the historicity of the Gospels. It seems like there's at least two different modalities where essences are the same. People, Mark might, I don't know if there's a woman that was raped and came from a poverty situation and didn't want to have that baby. I don't know what Mark would tell her. Just suffer, just this is your lot, or what, But a lot of people would say, well, it's her life. She has to answer for it. So give her the opportunity to make the decision. And if I were talking to a fundamentalist, I would say, is God almighty? And if the fundamentalist said yes, I'd say, well, couldn't God put the soul of that fetus into another fetus and be born into the world? What would the person say to that? So I don't know. I was really upset when I left. I got a disturbing letter from the diocese saying, preach on abortion and here are the things you should say. And I couldn't say those things. It was just too denigrating. I don't go for abortion, and I would hope that none of my female family members would have to face that decision. That's not a very pleasant thing. And I certainly don't agree with the athlete who said, I got an abortion because I wanted to participate in the Olympics. But, there's a lot of, unless you walk in the other person's shoes, and all these older white men telling women what to do with their bodies, I'm kind of in that camp. Who are the, who are these people telling other people what to do? It's just, so that's where I am with that topic. I could see talking about abortion, trying to do everything to prevent it, but then the church doesn't even go for birth control. So, there's so many crazy things there. It's telling people in South America not to get abortions, and you also can't use birth control either. So go figure. There's too many inconsistencies and hypocrisies, and, it's just, so I couldn't read that letter. And that was one of the things that contributed to my saying, I cannot be in a church that has this kind of voice about abortion. And here it is 40, 50 years after I made my decision, and the same damn stuff is going on. There's been, except among 50 or 60% of Catholics who just marginalize it, kind of Richard McBrien's idea of marginalizing Catholics, So yeah, I'm kind of upset at the way, it's a complicated thing. There should be more of a not knowing attitude, not knowing, more respect for a little bit of mystery in things, and that we're evolving in our understanding of things. And is there a way we can help people become free of having to get an abortion? But while we are, life it's not perfect. So I don't know. Anyway, so that's my 2 bits.
Well, I think you're getting
I'd like to hear
I'll
some
mute my-
more. I'd like to hear
I'll mute
some
my-
more, George. I'd like to hear some more from you, because you had 40 or 50 years of counseling and coaching others in counseling conflict resolution. Isn't that the core of what you did?
Yes, I worked with 8 to 10,000 couples and families that were breaking up. Yeah. And had children. They all had children. And they needed to come to a plan for taking care of them, and they were in dispute, right? And they were in the legal system, and I was in the legal system, but I was a mental health professional in the legal system in the family court. The court would send these people over, and I talked to them about all kinds of things. Yeah.
But
Right,
then,
so
did you not have responsibility for half of the state of California to mentor those who were doing that on the local levels from the Bay Area
Right.
down to San Diego?
That's right. Yeah, the last 10 years, it was the whole state of California, all 58 counties, visiting the courts and local places out in Bishop and Redding and Red Bluff and El Centro and all over the place, and providing training and consultation, right? My unit, right?
And did you a lot of role play with these people that you were coaching?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we did role play, and part of my training was in psychodrama, where people would act out different roles. So during a conflict, I would, if somebody's attacking the other party, I would go over and stand next to that party, and I'd say, could I have a go at trying to say what you mean, and let me see if I can, why don't you tell me if I got it right? So I take out all the barbs and all the put downs and all the judgmental stuff from what the person was saying, and try to make it more empirical and just behavioral, just describing things. Instead of, one person could say, that damn guy, he never shows up on time at all. It just drives me crazy. And so I go over next to him and I'd say something like, I have my life to live and I've got things planned. And when he doesn't show up on time, it really upsets the whole apple cart on my part. Is that what you're trying to say? You say, yeah. And then the other guy could hear it, because there's not all this attack in there. So that was role play, kind of a little role play. I also role played, my mentor, talking about mentors, the person who hired me, who was a pioneer in mediation, about 4 years in, we had these training conferences, and he said, and I was invited to be part of a family dynamic. I was going to be the father in a conflictual family. And Hugh McIsaac, he said, George, you're a closet thespian. You should take that role. So that was my opening up into drama and doing more trainings and joining up with other mediators to give trainings and act out different scenarios, and what do you do when there's an impasse, etc., and how can you help people expand their views and focus on the children. That was a big thing. That was the primary leverage of. So I've been in the midst of marriage, and I've seen people that I thought never should have been married, and then I saw other people who really loved each other, and it seemed like we're as well suited as could be, but they were crashing on the rocks of their cultural backgrounds or what they learned as a Black man in terms of not being as gentle towards women or something, but both of them wanted a marriage and were both professionals, et cetera, successful and very sad. And then abusers who didn't even realize what they were doing. And they said, I'm going to die if she leaves me. I just can't live without her. And yet he's beat her up. And so I'd have him pinch his ear, and I'd say, pinch your ear real hard and let go. And then I'd say, what still hurts? And he'd say, well, my ear. Well, yeah, well, that's what abuse is. You beat up your wife and you didn't realize, and there was no pain for you, but, she really felt it. And so that's why love and fear can't coexist. So she doesn't want to continue on with you. So, yeah. So I saw quite a bit of stuff.
That George, that technique is a really super thing. Darla, my wife, is an MFT, and she told me that's just one of the very effective ways of having couples begin to understand the other one.
Yeah.
And she was just really, there were all these techniques with respect to understanding the other person's, and when it came to little kids, the sand play and all that kind of just wonderful stuff. But you said something really important. There were couples who should never have been married, probably didn't know what it meant to be married.
Right.
And therefore, you know, if individually one could go through quickly go through the process of annulment, but still that's not enough. And I think that's what Pope Francis was telling us, that you know we've got to. My humble opinion is Tom would say. He was saying that when we are able, I think, when we're able to grow up to the point of being able to recognize that this isn't a real marriage and it's causing the kind of chaos and suffering, there's no reason why you can't and shouldn't, you know, find another way. And those that have ought not to be kept from the sacraments. And there are people who that doesn't fit. How can
Yeah.
that be? It's never been
Right.
that way,
Yeah.
you know. But it has been that way, and the lack of understanding that we have that's not addressed is even more of a painful experience.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in for a second because, as some of you know, I have lived and worked 3 blocks down from the Greek Orthodox parish here in Irvine. And the power that is delegated to the pastor is so much more like the George Farrick work than what I see and hear in most Catholic parishes. And Fred, maybe you've got some insight into that.
I don't know. But something Ned said was, reminded me of a joke told by a sports writer here in Boston. You can only be young once, but you can always be immature. But in general, though, the absolutism that George Farrick was describing,
Yeah.
that any person who has practical wisdom knows that the perfect can be the enemy of the good,
Yes.
and you have to be prudential in concrete situations, which was really what it sounds like George was constantly teaching. And you were describing it too, Ned, in your own experiences with your sons and life. So like, for example, I asked Lonergan what he thought about the church's emphasis on not having abortions, and he said, well, it would be a good thing to get abortion out of the hospitals, but not to prohibit abortion, because if there aren't places where you can get a safe abortion, then people will go back to the alleyways and get them some other way that'll be even more harmful to them in their lives. So I like that approach.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
to be absolutist about it.
But wait.
So
Let me interrupt to ask a question, Fred. I understand that argument, but a pro-life counter to it is that if you accept the premise that an abortion kills a person, takes a life, there were not nearly as many lives lost in back alley abortions as there are today in abortions in clinics.
yeah,
So,
So I don't agree that if you just don't want the child that you had, say, out of wedlock, just get an abortion without thinking about it or worrying about it. I'm not for that kind of relativism. But there are conditions, it seems to me, under which people think they need an abortion, as George said, and that it should just be forbidden doesn't seem right to me. But I agree with what Tom said, especially about that the absolutists deny they disregard all the other bad things that are happening in the world, and they're choosing, for example, Trump, just because he used for his own purposes played the abortion card, and they ignore all the other serious immorality with regard to social justice that that Trump got involved in. I completely go along with what Tom said about those issues. Nevertheless, the problem is, and I think this is what all those dramas that Ned and um, Ned's wife and George handled, they really had to do with attaining practical wisdom.
Mhm.
And it's I'm amazed really to hear about how much of it George has. Not that I would not expect it, but just to hear it more concretely really is illuminating to me.
Yeah.
And I think just wonderful, praiseworthy.
I agree.
And also, just for example, in Ned's situation, um, that that both of his sons who have such differences respect him so well, so lovingly. And that says a lot for both Ned and his wife, I'm sure. So I'm just in admiration of the things I'm hearing from you guys who are so, it seems to me, practically wise. I think that argument George Crook just made is a serious one. And I think people have to think over in different ways. Uh, the awful thing about the women who want to control their lives is that they kind of act like their bodies are machines that they can control.
Yes.
And it's just you can apply whatever efficient technique you need to take care of whatever problem you have and so forth. I think that ideology of pro-choice is really an awful thing. So I don't equate that with practical wisdom, and I can't stand the people who push abortion. I have problems with Planned Parenthood and things like that. Not that maybe I think they probably do provide a good service in some respects, but that other way of thinking we can control and manipulate our lives is really not, doesn't have too much to do with being good in a serious sense, I think. So that's my take, sort of. I'm certainly not an expert on these matters, but that's sort of where I stand.
I part of what you said, Fred, reminded me that we can have extremes anywhere. And if we say, you will never tell a woman what to do or give her advice that is contrary to her uh, her mental construct. They are absolutely in charge of themselves, and whatever they want, they have to have. Can't say that to men. You can't say that to anybody.
Oh,
I think there are
and that's,
there are objective values.
the women
out
are being as absolutist in that school as George was describing the hierarchy in his
Yes,
life.
yes.
So,
Well, some are. I'd like to ask George a question to somebody who's been in these trenches. How many people glibly have abortions?
yeah,
What percentage of women who have abortions do it flippantly with no,
yeah, they use it as birth control.
Mhm.
well, some do, I guess, but do most
Oh, I
uh, who
have,
have abortions? I don't know.
but apparently the number of Catholics who have abortion is amazing.
It's to say, it's, I think, 1% higher than the national average,
Is
I
that-
believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty lot. That's a lot. And I think it shows how the church's approach to these matters is not very helpful all along the line.
Been
Yeah,
less
I
than,
know, I know a psychologist who's a contemporary, maybe she's about in her late 70s or 80s, and she grew up in a Catholic family, and they went to Blessed Sacrament Church, and she went to Notre Dame High School, and then went to Marymount, and then but she's not a Catholic anymore because her mother, what happened, anyway, her mother kept having a lot of children, and at the same time that she was the oldest of like maybe 8 kids, and she got married, and she was going to have a child, and her mother's drunken husband got her mother pregnant again because of the church's teaching on contraception, etc. And so there she is having a baby at the same time her mother's having like her 9th or 10th baby, and she just felt so, the church was so oppressive towards women and put them in such a hole that she's no longer a Catholic. She's a wonderful person and all that, but she just, that was it. And I have a friend who's a doctor in Utah whose whose niece is married a Catholic and had 1 or 2 children under very difficult circumstances, almost losing her life. And I think the Catholic father wants to go on and have more children, and because of the church's teaching or whatever. And so in those circumstances, that's a very difficult position, and you could see how somebody might say, wait a minute, I just I've had it, I feel oppressed. There's sexism involved, there's the male dominant church, and so they will go ahead and maybe have an abortion, or they'll go ahead and have children under these difficult circumstances, and it will affect their lives. I know in my own life, my stepson has 2 boys, 11 and 8, and lo and behold, in 2019, they informed us that Lauren was pregnant again, and they they only plan to have 2 children, but this 3rd one comes along, so they've had this child, and this child has brought a lot of love into their lives. It certainly changed their lives a lot. There's 24/7 attentiveness, that an infant requires and all that, and they just came out. That's the family that I just spent a week with, and the baby you know, they just love the baby. The two boys, crazy about him and all that. But it certainly has changed their lives quite a bit. But they had the child. Maybe some other family would have had an abortion. I don't know, but they chose to have the baby, and it's been a great enrichment to their lives, seemingly. Yeah.
So,
And if I were, you know, so that's a child who's a caboose. You know, they call him a caboose, who comes along years after, years after the parents maybe thought they were done parenting. You know.
well, when I first came to BC, it was soon after BC went co-ed,
Yeah.
and most of the women were looking forward to getting married. And now they're not doing that. I mean, they engage in the hookup culture, not
Yeah.
all, of course.
Yeah.
But 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 they don't think they can afford to have kids, and there's a lot to that. And then when they wait too long to have kids, there's a greater chance of having kids that are, you know,
Disabled.
yes. And so and the economy is there's always there's this line in Hobbes's Leviathan where he defines worth or dignity. And he says, a man's dignity is his price. And I often say, remembering what one of my colleagues said, she's a nurse, but she had the ability to stay with her kids to raise them till they were really better off as kids. They had 5 kids. But she told about a phone call in which the person she talked to said, you're just staying at home. So she said, yes. And the woman said, so you're not working? And she said, I've never worked so hard in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is that aspect that possibly is not. I mean, it is a big deal to be a mother, and I think when we talk about what's wrong with our culture, we're talking about the fact that in order to get by, most middle-class families have to have 2 salaries, and they're not raising the kids the way kids were raised when we were young.
Mhm.
And I think that has a lot to do with the state of the American culture and society.
Yeah, Fred, you're bringing up some important factors. I know one is I immediately think of housing, you know, and children, and I think of Ned, your son Mark, with 6 kids. You know, it's really expensive even to have a vehicle that he can drive around with the whole family.
Yes.
You know, our Denver family have had a Honda Pilot.
Mhm.
So it seats 5 people and it has a small, so when we go back there, you know, either my wife or myself will be in the back seats crunched in, and the other one will be in the back luggage department, all kind of crunched up unsafely. So you have to go to a Honda Odyssey if you want a seat, right? Or Toyota Sienna. Well, that costs like $30,000 to $40,000. You know, so what about poor people
Yeah.
and all this? You know, having kids and being in a 2-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood, or, you know, not a very good neighborhood, and they have another child and another child. And, you know, it fits in with what you're saying, Fred, about the economy. I mean, here's BC students thinking about whether they can afford kids. What about the worker in the hotel fixing, you know, making up the beds, and the guy in the kitchen, you know, fixing the breakfast in the, you know, cafe? making $17 an hour, and you know, and there's more.
17 is high,
Yeah,
some of these people.
yeah.
Uh,
So
Yeah, well, this connects with the problem we were talking about earlier with these gigantic companies and people who really run our economy
Mhm.
and really sweat the workers. As when some commentators who talk about Bezos saying that his workers paid for his flight up there for 10 minutes,
Mhm.
costing billions of dollars.
yeah,
Well, we know how they paid from not having adequate mental or medical care and
yeah,
being paid so little for their really backbreaking work and so forth.
right. Yeah,
So and then the other thing that Google and Amazon, when Biden said that one of the problems is that that if you're going to have a capitalist economy, you have to have competition. And if only these great big companies exist, and not only do they exist, but they make people sign agreements not to enter, not to work with any competitor. It's an awful situation, and so much of what we're talking about has to do with the fact that whereas in a well-ordered society, the economy is supposed to, economics is supposed to dispose of technology, and politics is supposed to dispose of economics. But for us, the combination of AI and the big businesses is wiping everybody else out.
Yep.
So this is an overwhelming problem.
yeah, it is. And I'm just thinking of one of the capital sins is greed. It's also one of the three Buddhist poisons. And Bernie Sanders is right. The system is rigged. It's rigged for greed. If you're wealthy, you can get all kinds of attorneys. It kind of galls me when I'm paying 5 times the amount of taxes that Trump is paying, and he's flying all over the place, living in Mar-a-Lago, and he's says, well, these are legitimate loopholes, so I'm taking advantage of them, of course. So, the whole system is rigged,
He
you know.
takes advantage of them by lying and
Yes, right.
the judges.
Exactly. Even more so. Yeah.
The Roy Cohn system of law.
Can I interject here a little bit? I'm going to try something.
Please do.
Okay. Let me see. Hold on just a second. Can I share this window? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. Well, that's what
Mark
came
Miller.
in the mail yesterday, as I mentioned in the email. And we had talked about perhaps having this as part of our discussion. By the way, this came from Goodwill in Chicago, I believe, via Amazon. And, they build it as being in good condition.
Looks practically new.
And it is not just good condition, it's in mint condition.
Wow.
There is no evidence that it has been cracked open more than just, let's say, through the introduction. Whoever, if somebody had it before, they took very good care of it and may have read the introduction and said, Goodwill.
Maybe it was David Tracy.
Maybe so.
He lives in Chicago.
But
he opened it up and
yeah,
read it in one go and said, I'm going to donate this.
should we make some kind of plan to have, let's say, a half hour or so of our time together each week devoted to discussing this? We'd sort of talked about this last last time. And
I'm definitely a yes.
with Fred sort of leading us in the discussion
Well, I have to lead you.
or
Yep.
answering questions.
Yeah, that'd be it.
Yeah. Now,
Answering questions. Yeah.
now one thing that I noticed is there are 10 chapters, and each chapter is between 15 and 25 pages. There's no chapter, I think, that's more than 25, and some are somewhat shorter. So, you know, it sounds like a chapter at a time might be doable and perhaps chewable if we bit it off. What does that sound like?
Yes.
Only Fred would know. I mean, we're not familiar with the book.
I think if you, Tom, if you sent us the book, then we could see the table of contents. We could read the preface, the introduction, or whatever, and then why don't we decide then? How's that?
Yeah, I think that would be good, but at least what I am saying is that it does seem to be in manageable chunks.
Yeah.
Now you might say, Fred, well, don't read this chapter, read that chapter first, and then that will make it clearer or whatever. Or what I will do is it'll probably take me 2 days to scan it. I've got a fairly fast scanner, but nonetheless, it's 225 pages.
Well, the people I know who teach Lonergan in college,
I'm sorry?
the people I know who teach Lonergan in college,
Yeah.
say this is the best introduction.
Oh,
Well,
good.
Oh, that's good.
and your name is, of course, in the acknowledgements.
Better be.
You and Sue are following Raymond Kemp, Otto Hentz, James Walsh, and then there's Fred and Sue Lawrence, and then Sean Copeland, and so on.
Right.
So it better be. Okay. So I will do what I can to get this out in a form that is usable for us.
It's very kind.
And
It is. Tom.
then we'll see what
I'm away from my books.
we can do. And
Yeah.
then
Well,
we can be in communication by email.
well, that must be quite a book, because if you can introduce the reader to 2,000 or 3,000 of Lonergan's pages and 200 pages, that's quite a feat.
Yes, it is.
Or the complexity of Lonergan's ideas.
And
Yeah.
he's a very clear writer.
Good.
That's good.
One of the
Okay.
more merciful dissertations I ever directed.
Good.
One thing that I'm going to try to do is to see if, and this might be done on Google Documents, I'm not sure, I'll experiment with it, but to see if we can all have the same copy, in a sense, the same document that we can edit, that we can annotate.
Sure.
So that we can make our own comments, our own underlining, whatever that sort of thing might be. I know you can do it, but I'm gonna experiment with it. I haven't done it before.
You mean without printing up what you scan?
Right.
Okay.
Of course, you can
notice that-
print, you know, if you want to. If you're more comfortable with a hard copy, obviously you can print it.
Well, a PDF allows highlighting and so forth.
It does.
Mm.
It does. But to be able to perhaps have a copy that we all could share our comments on, you know, and I think a PDF on Google Documents may allow for that. I'm just going to have to experiment.
Well, thanks a lot, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Okay,
Notice this picture of California is before the fires.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
actually, the cover photo is Tagaytay, Philippines.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And,
his mother is Filipina.
and the credit is to Paul J. Miller. Would that
Uh-huh.
be his son, perhaps?
Could be a brother, or it could be his dad. Oh, no, his dad's Thomas, so I don't know.
Okay, but the photo credit is Paul J. Miller and Tagaytay, Philippines. So,
Okay.
And Fred, did you say that Mark Miller is at USF?
Yes,
Yeah, that's in San Francisco here up in my area.
that's right.
Maybe at a certain point, he could be a guest.
Sure.
ah,
it would be interesting, yeah.
Well, that sounds super.
Maybe either at the beginning too, say we're about to embark on this. Is there anything that you would add to your book now that you've written it probably, what, several years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, Fred? Or,
Maybe 5 or 6.
okay, yeah,
any chapters you think we ought to skip?
right, exactly.
I think we should go straight through it.
My own sense is it might be much more profitable if we try to get Mark Miller on after we've gone through it. And then the rest of us just sit in on a conversation between Fred and Mark
Yeah, sure.
with
That's a
maybe
great idea.
our,
Mhm.
Yeah.
raising our hands timidly in the back of a class.
Fred, maybe you could email Mark and tell him what we're about.
Sure, I'll do that.
See what he thinks. Yeah, tell him. Yeah,
He didn't make many royalties on this sale from Goodwill, though.
No, he'll only make whatever the original purchase was.
no,
Whatever
well,
they,
maybe we can make a contribution if we think his book was worth it. We'll each contribute $25.
No, don't worry about it. It was never that expensive, I think. But I'm not sure.
well, often they will have the price on it. This one doesn't have the price. So anyway, I'll get it to you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
For you. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. And so now I will stop sharing.
I have a question for Fred. Fred, I'm slogging through von Balthasar's book on prayer that you recommended,
Yes.
and he's a remarkable writer. He's some of his metaphors, etc., are stunning,
Yeah.
but he's not easy.
No, he's not.
Pardon me?
That's true.
Yeah, he's not easy at all. Is there a commentary on that book kicking around? Do you know?
I don't
Or
think,
Cliff Notes or something?
oh, no, there's not. So
Balthazar for Dummies?
if you have questions about what he means, you could email me and I'll. try to-
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, my plan is to get through the book because superficially, which is the only way I can get through it. And then once I have an overview, to go back and attack it systematically.
That's the hermeneutic circle.
Is that what you call that?
Yeah.
Herman's Circle?
Well, you know how when you read a book, you have an anticipation of what the book is about. But as you read it, especially if it's kind of difficult like this, you realize you have to keep correcting what you thought was all about. And then sometimes when you get to the end, you say, oh, now I see what he was getting at. And you go back over it the way George is planning to do, and you comprehend it in a totally different way. In a
Yeah.
good way.
I mean, it's obvious to me that it is, truly a pearl of great price. I just don't know what the price is. I mean, or I don't know how to complete the metaphor, but
Yeah, I know.
it's quite
Or
difficult.
the, or the hermeneutic circle might lead you to say, I'm going to donate this to the Goodwill.
Uh, no, well, one thing about the guy is more than anybody I've ever read, I mean, I don't have great reading breadth, but is he's very reliant on St. Paul, more than, most spiritual writers I've encountered. I mean, it's very, very much epistle to the Romans and Paul generally.
Right, Paul
And Paul and who?
and John.
Yes.
George,
Yeah.
here's another idea is you could Google the title of the book and put review. You might be able to read a review that might put some context or whatever. Sometimes reviews can be helpful.
I tried that on Amazon, and there's only like one that's in any depth. There's several that say, "Hey, great book,"
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I meant a review that might have been in some scholarly or academic, when the book first came out.
Okay.
And the New York,
There's an idea.
America reviewed it, or Commonweal. Or,
Yeah. There's an
It's,
America review, but it doesn't.
is there?
It's
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
the guy who reviewed it didn't understand it either.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, what was he like, Fred? I mean, you took him in a course, right? You said.
No, I met with him more, but I've read all his works.
Oh.
And he's a polymath. His doctoral dissertation was on the history of modern German philosophy. And, that's really tough slogging. Hegel, Nietzsche, and so forth. And he's just a genius. And he was a Jesuit. He was trained with the Jesuits. So he's very under the influence of the spiritual exercises. But when he came to Basel, he was a spiritual director to the Catholic students at the University of Basel. And he got people so interested in the spiritual life that they wanted to form a kind of order of married couples, but a pretty thing which has vows and so forth. And he asked permission from the Jesuits, could he do that? And they said no. So he left the Jesuits.
Oh.
But he's a polymath. He and a Vorax. He seems to have read everything that was ever written, and he also is a great. He could sit down at any moment and play any piano piece by Mozart. He's just one of these guys who has this out of this world talent that's just extraordinary. And also he can be very down to earth. There are other books that are much more down to earth than that one. And the other thing is, from the early days, he was so intelligent that he couldn't, in general, what George was talking about it in terms of classicism, where everything's settled forever, never changing. Back in the old days, that was called integralism. And he was a strong opponent to integralism. And he wrote against it in a very effective way. And also he's so learned. His erudition is just amazing. And so he has a very open vision of the world. And he wrote a book about the church, which he called raising the bastions. In other words, getting rid of that autocratic, authoritarian way of being the church that we talked about earlier. So, and so he was a very sensible person. What I do know is, as he got older, he did get more worried about the church. But I think by and large, I know Lonergan, after the council, was on the International Theological Commission in Rome with him. And he just was astounded by how brilliant he is. So that's a little taste. He's a Swiss, he's an expert in German, but he's Swiss from Lucerne. And whenever you have in German names the thing of von, as is true in Spanish when you have de, it means he came from nobility. And so probably he picked up a lot of stuff from that lineage. When I first went to Basel, there was a colleague at one of the first meetings, one of the fellow students. His name was Fonarelli. I never knew what the von meant myself. And I said, oh, an Italian name. And he said, yes, we've been here for 600 years in Switzerland. So
Yeah.
an interesting thing. But anyway, he is definitely a priest of Yahweh rather than of Baal.
Well, that's reassuring.
Carry on, George, carry on.
Now, on that happy
I
note,
mean, he's going to get past Isaiah then, right? Or no, who was it? Elijah that
Elijah.
was slaying the priests of Baal.
on that happy note, shall we
We shall.
mutually depart our company? Since it
Sure.
is 1 minute before high noon.
Yep.
Out here anyway, much
well,
later for Fred.
here.
Yeah.
You know, I did get just in 1 minute, Joe DeMassa, we exchanged some emails and he said it didn't work for him to be a visitor, but he suggested Pat Nicholson or Chuck Cummings. He thought they might be good people as visitors. Anyway, I just passed that on.
Good thought.
Yeah, those are your classmates, Fred.
Yep.
Chuck Cummins was
Yeah.
not our classmate.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe DeMassa went on to teach world religions at Pasadena City College. That was one of his specialties. He also recommended the documentary on the Immaculate Heart Sisters called Rebel Love.
Rebel Love.
Rebel, R-E-B-E-L, love. Yeah,
Love. Thanks, George.
Rebel Love. Yeah,
Sister Corita,
right.
the
Sister
artist.
Karita.
Right.
We have some big gas tanks out here that were painted by her.
Really?
Gas tanks.
Is that on campus at BC?
No, it's kind of close to the beach.
So that's the sacred and the profane coming together.
And the propane.
Yeah, to be continued, that's for sure.
I hope she got a lot of
Thank
money. for the
okay.
rebels.
Tom Welbers, thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you all. And shall we simply say goodbye? God bless you
Yes.
all.
God bless.
Sure.
Adios.
To, stay in touch and pray for each other, and I'll get this out
Great.
as soon as I can.
Tom,
Thank you,
thanks.
Tom. Thanks for
Thank
doing
you.
that.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, adios.